Welcome back, everybody, to the Primary Science Podcast for another one of our deep dives. So today we'll be focusing on classification in years 4 and 6, and then we'll move into environmental change and human impact. So again, another really important one. And as always, we are absolutely blessed to have 3 expert guests to guide us through best practice for this part of the unit. So first up, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Joanna Moore, who is, among many other things, an area mentor for the Primary Science Teaching Trust. Joanna, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to recently in the wonderful world of primary science.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. I was a primary school teacher for 17 years. Early on, I became an advanced skills teacher in science, which I would never have expected when I trained. But I found that I had a passion for science and loved it. And for the final 8 years of my teaching, I was lucky enough to just teach science and computing across the whole primary age, which gave me a chance to really dive into it. More recently, I've been working for the Primary Science Teaching Trust. I spent 4 years writing content for Explorify and also mentoring Primary Science Teaching Trust Fellows. Those are the people who've had an award for being outstanding teachers. Currently, I mentor fellows, and then 3 days a week, I also look after my very young grandchildren, which I love.
That's nice. It's really good to have you with us, Jo. Our next guest is Harriet White, who is a lecturer in primary science at Exeter University. So, Harriet, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your role in the primary science world and what's been keeping you busy lately.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm a lecturer at the University of Exeter, and my work kind of revolves around the messy world of primary science. It's been a big part of my life for a long time. I trained actually at Exeter in primary science for my PGC back in 2006. And since then, I've been teaching in schools, but also at the university and researching and working really closely with children to really spark their curiosity about the world around them. One of my real passions is how we can see that science isn't isolated, so it connects with arts, technology, engineering, maths, and with the kind of lived experience that we all share. And that curiosity led me to a research project where we looked at the impact of transdisciplinary learning or STEAM education within schools and beyond. I'm also part of an initiative called Schools Across the Ocean project, which I'm hoping to talk about a bit later. And I lead the science aspect of that project. And that program connects schools with other schools across the oceans, including Brazil, Azerbaijan, and Dubai, thinking about oceans, climate, culture, and about the way science links us across the continents.
Do you think it would ever expand to places like Thailand, for example?
It absolutely would. I mean, it's growing and growing and growing, and we keep expanding every year. We went from a few hundred children involved, and now it's thousands of children. So it is growing, and especially if COP is going to be in Thailand at some point, because that's where we go.
Right.
We go where COP is. But yes, I think it certainly would.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay. Our third guest today is Mandie Lambert. So, Mandie, would love to know a little bit more about you and what primary science projects you've been working on recently.
Well, good morning and thank you for having me. So I am currently a primary school teacher in London. I've been a teacher for a very long time. I've been a primary school teacher for about 15 years now. I teach Key Stage 2, but I've spent most of my teaching time at primary in either years 4 or year 6. I've been a science lead for more than a decade, and I'm also a local school-based advisor for primary science, which I love. It means I have the privilege of working with other science leads in our borough in an advisory capacity. I get to go into other schools and see what they're doing and talk to the children. That's probably the bit I love most about my role at the moment. And I lead regular network meetings, so I get to know the science leads quite well. I love teaching science at this age range because they're so enthusiastic and they just want to know everything that we can teach them. And quite often I find that they're already very knowledgeable and are really keen to share what they know. So that keeps me on my toes as well.
I know kids of that age are usually very enthusiastic, but I wonder, with all of your passion as well, if it might be rubbing off onto the kids just a little bit. But it's really great to see the energy that you have for primary science. And yeah, thank you very, very much for being with us and giving us your time. Right. Okay, it's time to get stuck in now and see what some of the best ideas are in line with best practice for this unit. So in year 4, the children are asked to recognize that living things can be grouped and then, of course, classified based on their features and characteristics. So we meet those, the good old-fashioned classification keys among loads of other methods of grouping. And then by year 6, the children go on into greater detail and greater breadth, including, might I add, microorganisms, which we'll be talking about in more detail later, as well as plants and animals. So, Joanna, if it's okay, I'd like to start simple. If a year 4 teacher wants just one really solid, practical approach to teach grouping and classifying in this context, including classification keys, what would you suggest, to really get the most out of the children's learning?
Well, I'd definitely start with the children's interests, and that tends to be animals. So I would start with getting them to think about their favourite animal and then moving on to plants and animals in their local environment. So I used to always start with getting the children to pick a favourite animal and describe its characteristics to a partner. Now, obviously, they would focus on very much what it looked like, but I would also give them some keywords to really kind of prompt that. So things like vertebrate and invertebrate, which they would have touched on in year 3, hair, scales, feathers, lungs, gills, warm-blooded, cold-blooded, lays eggs. So those kind of things to start prompting that conversation. Once they've described that animal to their partner, I'd then get them and their partner to compare similarities and differences between those two animals. Now, that when you're going around listening to that, that's a great assessment tool, and it's a good way then of starting that process of grouping into vertebrate and invertebrate groups and teasing out some of the misconceptions or listening to what misconceptions they might have. Once they've done that, then I would put them into groups and I would give them some pictures of animals and get them to sort in their group. I wouldn't give them any criteria to sort with. I would just ask them to sort those animals and see what they came up with and listen to their discussions. But I would then lead that into a discussion where we would end up with class definitions of the vertebrate groups, which is really what you're focusing on in year 4. So the characteristics of mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds and fishes. Now, when you're doing that, I would say make sure that you have included in that penguins, whales, sharks, frogs and amphibians, because those are the ones the children struggle with. Every year 4 class I had children who thought penguins didn't have feathers, for example. You can kind of understand why children find mammals difficult. And then the amphibian group was always one that even in year 4, some children found tricky. So do that. And once you've got that definition, then you can reinforce that by getting children to sort more animals. They love creating fact cards. So that's quite a good one. And being able to research animals, always found that was very popular. Once you've done that, then you're using your local studies. And also, when you're grouping children, one thing I would say is you start introducing keys as you go outside. So from this, you can get the children grouping and classifying animals and plants that they find as they study a local habitat throughout the year. They can record what they found and the features that there were. You can give them spotter sheets and simple yes, no keys to identify those living things. At my school in year 4, we used our pond because we tried to have a different environment each year. And so year 4, it was the pond. And that involved pond dipping throughout the year and using yes, no keys to identify the invertebrates that they found in the pond. We did have fish and frogs as well. Now, children find making keys really hard. So my tip for that would be to play lots of Guess My Animal Plant games, where the children can only give yes and no answers. Ideally, this should be introduced in Key Stage 1, really. So it's something you want to feed down through the school. Makes a great starter, end of lesson, or even just wet play. And I think if children have had plenty of experience of that, then they find creating keys easier. Again, when I start with keys, I wouldn't go straight to paper. I would use post-it notes and either paper straws or lollipop sticks and create them on the tables in pairs or in groups. And that means that they can write their questions on the post-it notes. And when they realize their questions don't work, they can change them. And similarly, they can move things around when they realize that perhaps the question they asked isn't going to sort the animals in the way that they thought they would. Once I'd done that, what I used to do in year 4 was then get them to make a key for trees that we had, so focusing on the leaves in school, which they then produced for year 2 children, because year 2 children used to go around and use those for leaves. Plants, I think, is a bit more difficult than animals, particularly because you're focusing on flowering and non-flowering plants, and children won't necessarily appreciate that. So it's really important to think about the local habitat you're studying. It must have flowering and non-flowering plants, and ideally, looking ahead to year 5, also moss and ferns and other plants that they need to come across. So I think, drawing attention, for example, ideally if you've got grass, and drawing attention to the fact that grass is flowering, because otherwise what happens is you get into that activity where you're asking children to sort plants, and really you're telling them the answers because they actually have no experience. And of course, they'll just forget it the following day. So you need to make it quite genuine, and you have to give them really good experiences where they do see how those plants change over the course of the year.
I think, thank you very much for that, first of all, Jo. I think that was very expertly done little masterclass there. You did it perfectly, because I spotted already quite a few things there. The focus on inclusion, preempting misconceptions, giving the children agency, lots of practical tips as well. Those little tips are really important to ensure the children are successful. And then the yes, no games, just to make it really fun as well. So yeah, that was really, really expertly done. And thank you so much for that. Over to Harriet now. The non-statutory guidance for year 4, which is definitely worth having a look at, it states that students should begin to group vertebrates and invertebrates. So then, in line with best practice, what activity might make this as relevant to the kids as possible, and is also maybe a great way to build inquiry skills.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to what Jo was saying, and I think that using your school ground, especially if you've got a pond, is so helpful for living things, not just for classification, but also adaptation and life cycles and things. So I love a good pond dip. So I think we can be quite ambitious and introduce year 4 pupils to grouping vertebrates and invertebrates through something called a mini BioBlitz. A BioBlitz is a big national program where we classify and record the species and organisms that we find in a set place over a set time. It's usually about 24 hours. But a mini BioBlitz is, it's essentially a mini beast hunt. But we can widen it up to think about not just mini beasts, but looking at what animals we can see in our school grounds over a certain time within set parameters. So it can be a problem-solving inquiry, or it could be you can change the nature of the inquiry. But essentially, it's a kind of collaborative race against the clock to identify and record as many species of plants and animals as you can. And the children can choose where they explore, what organisms to observe, how to record their findings, but that could also be really scaffolded as well. And they will hopefully find an array of different creatures. They'll find worms, insects, spiders, birds, small mammals. I did a research project with my colleague Bethan Stagg looking at children's perceptions of soil invertebrates. And we visited lots of year 3 and 4 classes across different schools to carry out these mini BioBlitzes. And I remember thinking, we went into one very urban school, and it was during a heat wave, which feels hard to believe right now. And the ground was just baked dry, and we didn't think we were going to find anything, but we did. If you roll over a stone or a log, we found spiders, we found moths. And of course, you'll almost always find herring gulls or jackdaws or something around. So there are lots of things to be found within the school grounds. I think that when we have the opportunity to gather in that data, we can then use that to help to classify, to sort them into vertebrates and invertebrates, but also think about maybe having some kind of inquiry from that. Incidentally, the intervention that we did with these children in year 3-4 revealed that with having more time doing mini bioblitzes, that children have an increased awareness of the ecological importance of soil organisms. They have improved attitudes, helping shift from fear and disgust to curiosity. So moving from being afraid or grossed out by creatures to actually being curious about them, and strengthening that attention and interest to the less charismatic of the creatures that we might have in our school grounds. And that showed how powerful child-led inquiry can be. Even when you think there's nothing to find, you'll find something. So then we could move this on by thinking about generating their own criteria. So thinking to what Jo was saying actually about having their own criteria, and then giving them some kind of scientific criteria to distinguish vertebrates from invertebrates. And thinking about the animals that they didn't expect to find, helping them to revise their ideas about thinking about science, and strengthening those scientific skills. So observation, comparison, reasoning, evaluation. So there's lots of working scientifically skills built into this, as well as the sort of curriculum knowledge.
Lovely. I have to say, I've had a little sneaky peek at the National BioBlitz Network site, which, side note, incredibly cool name that I think the children must love, BioBlitz. I particularly like the section called I Record. I saw, users can upload photos from their BioBlitz and almost be a contributor to this database of photos of all sorts of living things. And I imagine that's got to be incredibly empowering for the children. And to be honest, something I would love to do myself as well. So really, really good idea.
It's really, really fun. And it's a really kind of like that citizen science aspect of that science inquiry. We can genuinely contribute to big data sets around what we have in our gardens. Yeah. And there's actually the Big Garden Birdwatch, which we've just had as well, which is also a scientific way of gathering data, which contributes to a much bigger data set.
Really nice. Okay. Thank you, Harriet. And over to Mandie now. So for year 6, we're still looking at classification, but perhaps in a more advanced form. What do you think a really good investigation or a project in year 6 might look like in comparison to year 4?
Well, I think the tricky thing about year 6 quite often is when teachers read what they need to do in terms of the national curriculum for classification. The danger is they will come up with a lot of the same activities as the children have already done in year 4. So ideally by year 6, that a lot of the activities will be similar, but hopefully working scientifically skills will have been embedded as they go through the school, and those skills that they need to carry out a good investigation or project will have been explicitly taught. And so we can link in with other parts of the curriculum like maths. I love the idea of getting that data set. We've actually done, as part of our curriculum in past years, we've done some work on, so I'm going off topic a bit, and we've done some citizen science. We've had some air pollution tubes out, and then handed our data back in for that, and it's contributed to a much bigger picture, which has led to some changes locally, which was really exciting for the children to see. So getting back to the classification, that means that so the children should have, hopefully, the ability to ask relevant questions by now. Going all through the school, they've practiced their yes/no questions, they've played lots of games, they've done lots of work about asking questions and controlling variables. So I would really hope that the children would be able to then use those skills in year 6. So my aim would be to have the children be able to write classification keys independently. I absolutely agree with Jo when she says the children do find this really tricky, and they still do in year 6. But my aim would be that they would now be able to do that more independently. I would start very much, as Jo said, with the year 4, really observing, practicing their observation skills. And plants are great for this. I know the children love animals, but sort of moving on a bit so that we don't repeat, plants are great for this. I love going outside. I love using our local area, but leaves are great because you can go and collect them from somewhere else in advance and bring them in if you don't have great school grounds to work with. So I would start by getting them to really, really observe, what do they see, noticing the features of the leaf, things like, is it a simple leaf or a compound leaf, i.e. does it have a single blade or leaflets? How many veins can they see? Are they parallel or branched? Is the edge smooth or serrated or lobed? Is it a needle, a pointed leaf, a round leaf? So really observing those features. Then in a similar way to year 4 with the animals, can they describe the leaf to their partners? And once they're armed with that vocabulary and their detailed observations, then we can start grouping. So we're following the same sort of pattern, but I would want them to be doing this with much less input from me as a teacher. Once they've completed that activity and we're confident with that, then the children should be able to apply their knowledge and skills to new situations. So we're very fortunate. We have quite an extensive forest school area at our school. We have a pond. So I would then send them out to do some research. Could be the pond, we have a bug hotel as well. So it could be that. I had one teacher a few years ago, and I was amazed at how well this worked, put up some night vision cameras around the school, and he caught images of badgers and foxes. It's amazing what happens on the school grounds at night when we're not there. So all these things potentially could be used, and the children can then design their own and create their own classification key. And they do get quite excited when it's the local area, when it's their own things, the things they see every day. Flowers are another good option if you don't have a good outside space, of course, because again, you can bring those in, and there's so much to observe with different kinds of flowers. To develop that further into more of a project, and again, this follows on from what Harriet said about surveying their local grounds. You can bring in the idea of quadrats and tapes to do a transect, which takes it a bit further, uses measuring skills. The data collected then can be recorded in a variety of ways, and the children can really think about what they want to do with that, how they want to use that. Would they like to create a display to share their knowledge with the school, maybe at a school fair or something like that? On one occasion with a group of the children, unfortunately, I didn't get to take the children with me, but I did get to take all their findings and their data and what they produced up to City Hall in London, present it there, which was very exciting. Those opportunities are out there, and it really makes it relevant for the children to see that it's used. It's not just something they do in school and then that's done. It's part of the bigger world.
I was going to say, what I used to do, following on from what Mandie was saying, is I grew mint, and I grew lots of different kinds of mint. And the year 6 class used to get so excited that chocolate mint smelt of chocolate, and that you could get blackcurrant mint. And they were all mint, but they were all different. So again, like Mandie was saying about looking at the leaves and things, that was, it took a bit more time to acquire these mints, but once we had them, oh God, the children used to love classifying and making a key of all these different mints. And you can do it with lots of different herbs, because lots of herbs are kind of similar. Sage, you can get different, you can get a blackcurrant sage and things like that. So it's quite a fun way to do it as well.
Thank you so much for that there, Jo, and Mandie as well, for your ideas. And I really like the whole theme there of bringing flowers and plants into the classroom, because not all classrooms and schools are built the same. So having an idea like that we could all access in the classroom is just fantastic. And I caught something else there, Mandie, earlier, I think immediately after this, I'll be going online and searching how much it is for night vision camera because I would love to see that what's going on
Absolutely.
at my school at night.
Yes,
It's brilliant, and I
that
think
was
the
really
kids
exciting.
love it. Yeah, nice. So I think amongst
Yeah.
all of the different ideas there, let me know if I'm wrong here. The difference between year 4 and year 6 isn't just greater breadth; it's also that greater independence and agency. Is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Microorganisms can sometimes be, slightly unfamiliar territory. I just wonder, Joanna, if you could help us find perhaps the best entry point for microorganisms with year 6.
I used to start with getting a vet in to talk about how important it was to know whether it was a virus, a bacteria, or a fungi causing an illness so they could decide how to treat it. We originally made contact with somebody through the STEM Ambassador Scheme and then held on to that person and she came back. So a good starting point is that Explorify activity. Have you ever found mold growing on bread in your home? And the reason for that is, every child virtually will have had a situation where they'll have come across mold on bread. So they can all talk about it and raise questions about it. And then that leads into a broader discussion about what are microorganisms and whether they're all bad for us. I love the eBug resources, which you can search online very easily. And this has a really nice activity where the children use Play-Doh to make models of either a virus, a bacteria, or a fungi. So we used to do that in pairs, and I gave them little petri dishes, so they'd put their model inside a petri dish, and then they would search on the internet for some more information about that and make a poster with the petri dish in the middle. So it made a lovely display to go on the wall. And this was the lesson the vet came in for. So they would be doing this and she would talk to them. And then we would put them into groups of 6. So you'd have a pair that had looked at virus, a pair that had looked at bacteria, a pair that had looked at fungi. And then I would print off some images of different viruses or bacteria. So like, chicken pox and all that sort of stuff. And then the idea was they would look at them on their table and, having researched them, decide whether it was a fungus, a bacteria, or a virus. And they really, really enjoyed it. It got them to think of themselves as scientists as well, because they were all being microbiologists and they had the vet there talking about how she did that. You do have to be a little bit sensitive. The children enjoyed it, but I did one year have one autistic child who's quite traumatized by the idea that there were all these microorganisms everywhere. It was during the COVID period, so that was obviously children were far more sensitive to all of this at the time. There's a whole lovely set of eBug lessons. Another of the eBug lessons that we used to use was focusing on useful microbes and investigating the conditions required for yeast to rise. So that was good. But also the CIEC, the Chemical Industries Education Centre, I think it stands for. If you want to do a kind of project, they have a project about using mould to grow medicines. But again, that uses growing mould on bread in that unit. If you're going to grow mould, having done it a number of times, just be careful about the bread that you buy, because obviously if it's got lots of preservatives in, so go to the supermarket, they put preservatives in to make sure that bread doesn't go mouldy for a long time. And obviously you want it to go mouldy quickly in the classroom. So bread from the bakers, I've found that pita bread works well as well, but just check the ingredients. And then if you've got space in the curriculum, the other thing that I used to do is make pizzas, which, was all good fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know many kids who wouldn't like to make pizzas and bread in class. That's definitely a good idea. And I have to say as well, I have to second that I love the eBug resources as well. I've only dipped into it a little bit, but I really think more people should know about this one. So I will put the link in the description as well, just so it's one click away. Everybody, you have to have a look. There's loads of cool resources and lesson plans as well. So over to Harriet now. I wonder if you have another practical classroom approach here with microorganisms.
Yeah, thank you. I love what Joe said about having experts coming in to talk about science is really, really effective. And also using 3D models in science to bring the abstract to the concrete, I think is such an effective technique in this instance and also in the bigger space examples as well. Yeah, so I also hear what you say about children and adults being sensitive about the idea of germs. So keeping one eye on good bacteria, and remembering that they are also beneficial to our health and well-being, and that balance between, keeping safe and keeping things healthy, but also that they can be good for us. And I thought this was a really good opportunity for some inquiries in science. So thinking about what conditions speed up the growth of bread molds, what makes yeast more or less active, how do microorganisms turn waste into compost, why do some microorganisms help us and others make us ill, where in our school do microorganisms thrive the most? I thought that would be a really interesting study to do. I haven't done it myself, but I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, have you? And where do they thrive the most, or do I not want to know?
It was very funny. I think it was in the staff toilets. I think because how we did it was we wiped pieces of bread on different surfaces and left it to grow. And at the children's toilets, which everybody predicted would be the worst, were the cleanest, because obviously the cleaning staff were really, really rigorous in the children's toilets.
Well, that's good to hear. And I bet the children loved that final result as well.
Yeah, it was very popular.
And I was also thinking it could be potential for some kind of cross-curricular STEAM work. So linking the idea of microorganisms to health, sustainability, food systems, plant science, and maybe some big topic ideas, especially in year 6, thinking like what would the earth look like without decomposer microorganisms? How can microorganisms help us solve big global problems? Like bacteria can help us clean up oil spills. It can help us to break down plastics. What patterns do we find in the growth of microorganisms? So taking those moldy bits of bread and thinking, what can we do with this? So thinking about photography, with maths, kind of doubling and graphing, art, symmetry, patterns, scale, texture, maybe even soundscape. So thinking like what sound do these colonies make as they grow and ferment and decay? And then maybe how do microbes connect us across time and culture? So thinking about ancient fermentation, the purpose in religion and epidemics, public health. So it has got the potential to be a really kind of wide cross-curricular project as well.
Yeah, you've given us the full cross-curricular map there. That's really good. So over to Mandie. We've seen these huge range of activities and inquiries that the children can do here. There's so much for microorganisms, but I just wanted to touch on what may be the biggest misconceptions that teachers need to watch out for here.
I'm not sure I can add much to what Joe and Harriet have said. I love their ideas. I think that's really comprehensive overview of this part of the unit. But I think the biggest misconception is that children come into it with the idea that all microorganisms are germs and germs are bad. We've mentioned COVID. I appreciate that we did have to be sensitive at that time and still do. But I found that really sparked an interest in the children, because suddenly the idea of the viruses was right there, and they wanted to know more about it. And I found that actually really, really helped, that fascination that was there. Joe and Harriet have both mentioned good bacteria. And of course, this is a hot topic at the moment with regards to how our overall health and well-being is linked to our gut biome. So I think exploring how microorganisms are useful and beneficial is a really important part of this topic. In a similar way to how Joe approached it, I've really enjoyed researching microorganisms with Year 6, and particularly with my STEM club. We would look, so obviously the actual microorganisms are too small for them to look at. We do have microscopes in school, but they're not powerful enough, of course. So I would show them photographs of different bacteria and viruses and fungi taken through a powerful microscope. and we would look and we would find out what they were, why they were important. We made models of them using plasticine and pipe cleaners, and took our own photos of these so that we could create a great display. And that just enabled the children to understand that the term microorganisms encompasses such a variety of different organisms, and finding out why different microorganisms are important highlighted that although some might be harmful, many are beneficial. And the children started to realise that they can't all be lumped together under one heading, germs. There is more to it than that.
We've looked at classification, including microorganisms, in quite some detail. So I think we should just move on to environmental changes now, another really important part of the curriculum here. And so, going back to the notes from the curriculum, they mention human impact, both positive and negative, including things like litter, pollution, population and development, deforestation, and then the positive examples as well, like nature reserves and planned parks and this kind of thing. Over to Joanna. What's perhaps one strong practical inquiry that helps children understand how an environment can change, and then what that does to the living things?
Yeah, I think inquiry in this sense is a little bit more tricky, but the one that you could do is to look at plastics and their impacts on the environment and wildlife. So you could, in your school grounds, bury 3 objects. Obviously, you need to clearly mark where you put them and what you're putting where. But you could bury an apple core, you could bury a piece of newspaper, and also something like a plastic crisp packet, about 8 centimetres down, so you don't have to put them too far down. And then the children could dig them up 6 weeks later and see what's left to understand that plastics do not biodegrade. You could link this to a litter pick and a discussion of what would happen to the animals if they try to eat or get trapped in them, in the plastic bag, or the impact it can have on plants if it's blocking their light. Explorify have a similar activity called Stringy Patterns, which is a zoom in, zoom out. And in that, it's a tea bag that you're zooming out on. And in that has a linked activity, which is all about planting tea bags and seeing how they biodegrade. Tea bags are now changing and more of them are biodegradable, but still quite a lot of tea bags have some form of plastic in them and don't biodegrade. Once you've done that, obviously if you've done a litter pick, you can get the children to research how long each of those items take to biodegrade that they find on their litter pick. They can be, because I'm always quite shocked when you do that and find out how long things take to biodegrade. I think when we're doing these sorts of things, it's important to always have a positive action as well, because otherwise the danger is it's very negative for the children and quite scary. So if you do something like that, then you could link it to persuasive writing, which is what I've always done in the past. And if you're doing it with litter, then obviously you could highlight the problem and persuade people to take the litter home with them. The Primary Science Teaching Trust have also just this month produced a new resource, The Cycle of Plastic, which deals with those issues. And also the CIEC has some quite nice resources on plastic as well.
Thank you. I like the activity where you're burying different items, in a controlled manner, and quite a lot of these inquiries can take a little bit longer and require a bit more planning and patience, but I think they do have so much more impact throughout the year. And as you said, they can be linked to a lot of other projects and subjects as part of a, perhaps thematic learning or whichever kind of curriculum you do. And over to Harriet now. What's perhaps another practical inquiry we could do with the kids for this one?
Thank you. I'm going to go ambitious again and say you can join our Schools Across the Ocean programme. So we devised this a few years ago as a kind of response to wanting children's voices to be heard at a bigger scale. So we wanted them to be heard at the COP conference. So we looked at seagrass, so seagrass habitats within the world, and we chose that because there are seagrass habitats on the coastlines of practically every country. And it links coastal schools across the UK, Brazil, UAE and Azerbaijan. I mentioned that before. And it brings together scientific inquiry, creative arts and intercultural exchange. The children absolutely love being twinned with another school in a different country. They learn so much just from that. But we're also supported by world-leading scientists who are experts in marine biology, ocean science and climate science, who come in and they talk to the children. It's online, but they answer children's questions and they listen to what they have to say. And one of the responses we had from the children was that they were really surprised that scientists wanted to talk to them. But the scientists were delighted. They loved talking to the children and hearing what they had to say. And then we also had the good fortune of working with some wonderful artists. So we had the Hamishibai Cardboard Theatre Company. We're working with them again this year, where they make cartoons out of cardboard, and they do workshops with the children, so the children can make cartoons as well. And the children get a chance to express their findings around seagrass. So we have a teacher's toolkit, which is free, and it's all free and accessible to anyone who's in the project. And the toolkit guides you through the science of seagrass, and the children get a chance to narrate their own videos. They're kind of like David Attenborough style. And then they have a chance to write their own climate stories. And they then make their own cartoons. And they've been able to express these findings through drawings, poetry, films, and stories. And they share these with their partner class. And this work has been showcased at COP. So some of the children actually went to COP and read their poems to world leaders. And also we have a poetry anthology called We Are the Ocean, which is just children's work, children's artwork and their poetry. There's been a big poster campaign in Princess Hay in Exeter. And this year we've made climate cards, which you probably can't see, but they're kind of storytelling cards where you can choose a character, you choose a setting, you find out a bit more about the science behind those settings. And then there's an ending card, which is like, is this going to be a happy ending? Is it going to be a terrible ending? Or is it going to be an amazing ending? And so they can think about futures, what's the future going to look like for seagrass and ocean conservation? So it's a really exciting project. It's growing, it's getting bigger every year. And the thing I love the most about it is that it really does showcase children's voices. And then they've gone on to do their own things as well. So they've organised their own beach cleans, organised campaigns for reducing plastic, for seagrass planting. So like speaking of tea bags, they put little seagrass seeds in these little tiny tea bags, and then divers go down and plant them in the seabeds. So it's just a really wonderful campaign, but this is, as I say, quite ambitious. But the toolkit, we're hoping to be able to disseminate to all teachers to just pick up and use it.
I'm sold. That's it. Please, let's get it to Thailand. It sounds fantastic. And
okay.
Yeah, we'd love to be involved. Okay, so over to Mandie now. And as Harriet has just so beautifully set that scene there with the Schools Across the Oceans project, I'd love to continue just for a bit talking about how we can enhance that agency in the children related to sustainability and climate change. As the wonderful Catherine Hathaway, a previous guest on the last episode, mentioned, that climate anxiety, I think we've touched upon it today, it can be sort of protected against when we include, or when we use hope and agency in the children. So perhaps how can we make these habitat changes relevant and real for the children while still grounding it very much in what they can do to help, and presenting that agency to them from the outset?
Yes, I think I'm going to bring it down to a more local area. I love the oceans project. I really do. I actually trained as an oceanographer, so you've got me. But unfortunately, we're nowhere near the ocean. But I think this is an area that can link into so much of what goes on in the school. And it will have more relevance if we link the parts that we can to wider initiatives within our school. And I'm sure in most primary schools, we will try and focus on the positives of what we can do rather than the negatives of what is going wrong. So I think that's a really important focus to have. So in our school and in many of the schools I work with, we've addressed a lot of these issues through our annual STEM weeks. So that comes from British Science Week, which happens every year, and lots of schools get involved in that. In our school, it's a STEM week. We like to bring in other subjects, and we get a whole week, and that really enables us to do a more in-depth project and across the age range as well. It's a focus in year 4, but it's great to be able to involve the other year groups as well. And a number of times we've looked at environmental issues in more detail, including in our very, very local area, our own school grounds, slightly wider in our local community, what we can do to help maybe in a park. And we also zoom out to more global levels. So an example, last year our early years classes looked at bees and why they're important, how we can encourage the bees to visit our school. We can plant some bee-friendly flowers, which they did in their reception garden. Year 1 looked at migration. They looked at polar bears, the issue of global warming. They drew some beautiful maps to show where animals migrate and where the ice might be retreating. Lower Key Stage 2 looked at the plastics issue that Joe's already mentioned. And we really thought about how we can change our own practice, such as trying not to use single-use plastics, reusing when we can, recycling when we can, and making sure the school offers pupils, staff and parents the opportunity to recycle. I do a gate duty, or I used to do a gate duty on a regular basis, and we have a recycling bin just by the gate, and I often saw the parents doing their recycling on the way in or out of school, which was really nice to see. Upper Key Stage 2 went off-world to explore how sustainability on Earth is, knowing about that is vital, not just for us, but for future generations with the potential of space exploration. We found that STEM Week is a particularly good method for engaging the children in science and their environment, and encourage them to take the time to consider these issues for themselves and relate it to our everyday lives. It contextualizes these sometimes abstract ideas for them and gives them the agency they need to keep looking up to their environment as they grow up. So that's in our school and hopefully in a wider area as they grow up. We love having a celebratory assembly at the end of our STEM week, and each year group stands up there and presents their findings, and it does have a really positive and hopeful feel, which is exactly what we're aiming for. And it is so lovely to see children as young as nursery age children standing up there, singing the bee song, showing us their beehive. It's super cute. And the older children, sometimes we have beautiful presentations and they put on lab coats and have a board that they can point at. It's different every year. It depends what they've studied and how the teacher has helped them to present it. But I really do feel it gives both understanding and hope. And it's a really good vehicle for doing that.
Thank you very much there, Mandie. And so before we wrap up, I'd just love maybe one final takeaway from each of our guests. Just perhaps one thing that you would want teachers to really remember when teaching classification and environmental change. So perhaps, Joe, can we start with you?
Yep. I'd say link it to the local area so the children can see the relevance and really take advantage of their interests. Give them plenty of choice when it comes to classifying animals, as every child has a passion for animals. That, and start playing those yes-no games very early on.
Okay, and Harriet, what's your final takeaway?
Thank you. Well, I guess mine is probably that we should really try our best to focus on our connection with nature. We know that knowledge alone isn't going to solve the climate crisis, that connection will. So work on nature connectedness shows that simply knowing about environmental problems isn't enough to change our behavior, which is what we have to do. We protect what we feel emotionally connected to. And we know that when given a chance, children are naturally really connected with nature. They're curious, they're empathetic, they're deeply engaged with the living natural world. And we know that children are spending less time in nature, that we are all becoming less connected. So if we have any opportunities to reconnect with our classes, we should do it. So spend as much time outside as we possibly can, especially when we're doing biology, but in any subject, in any area, even when it feels really difficult. And I know it's challenging sometimes to take our classes out, but when you can't get out, can you bring nature into the classroom, using whatever we have, the school grounds, a patch of moss, a fallen leaf, the puddle after the rain. These small everyday encounters really deepen children's sense of belonging into the natural world, because ultimately having that strong connection is the heart of climate education. And it's what helps us and children to care enough to protect our planet, and also to believe that they can.
And Mandie, what would you say to all our listeners out there about this unit?
I would absolutely agree with Jo and Harriet that we should use what the children are already interested in and absolutely use our local area. Bring nature into the classroom when you can't get out. Make it real, make it relevant. There is so much we can do by taking the children out and letting them see what's all around them. And we already have their interest. We already have their enthusiasm. So work with it.
Brilliant. And that's it, everybody, for living things in their habitats. I just want to give a huge, really heartfelt thank you as well to our wonderfully generous guests, Joanna, Harriet and Mandie, for sharing your expertise with us today. And so later on in February, we move on to the next deep dive in the next unit, which is materials. So until next time, everyone, thank you so much for listening, and bye for now. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.